Hi, my name is Babe Bryan, and I'm in Math 650, and today I'm going to be talking about Egyptian mathematics and the mathematicians of the African diaspora. So I wanted to start by discussing ancient Egypt and go into their timeline a bit. So ancient Egypt started in the Egypt that we know today, the unification in 3100 BC, and that unified Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. And then Egypt was over Egyptian rule until the Ptolemaic period, and that was when Alexander the Great decided to conquer Egypt in 332 BC. But then he died at just the early age of 32 years. And so that's when his general Ptolemy took over and ran Egypt over Greek rule. During this time, he decided to have Egypt stay mostly the way it is. He didn't make a lot of changes, but the Greeks did exchange with the Egyptians artistic, social, and religious aspects. And then that brings us all the way until the dispersion of Egyptians, and that was mostly through slave trades and conquests. Some of the main conquests that dispersed the Egyptians were the Macedonian, Roman, and Arab conquests. And then that brings us to the current African diaspora, people of today that are of Egyptian descent. And those people live in America and all throughout the world from the Egyptians. And then going on to the ancient Egypt, there was some debate on where the ancient Egyptians came from, and they're commonly referred to as now as Afrocentric because people debated whether Black Americans were of Egyptian descent, and DNA tests more recently they did a DNA test on mummies to show that ancient Egyptians were in fact Black. And this had been hidden for many years. Even sculptures of ancient Egyptians, they had their lips and noses chiseled to try to hide their ancestry and where they came from. And even movies and documentaries of ancient Egyptians, they hardly ever were portrayed as Black Africans. So then moving on to the start of math in Egypt. So the first period of ancient Egypt was known as the pre-dynastic period, and at this time, this was the introduction of writing had came about. And the writing was done in Egyptian by scribes. And scribes took on civil service duties such as record keeping, tax accounting, the management of public works, and overseeing military supplies and payrolls. And young men would go to scribal school and learn how to read and write, and then they would also learn basics of mathematics. And the mathematics that they learned that we have documents of today are in the Rhind Papyrus and the Golden Sheaf Papyrus. The Rhind Papyrus you can visit today in the British Museum, and it's a copy made in 17th century BC of the original. And in it is a long division table of fractional parts that are used to help with division, and there are also solutions to 84 specific questions dealing with the arithmetic and geometry. And then the Golden Sheaf Papyrus, it's located today in the Moscow Museum of Fine Arts, and the papyrus is from the 19th century BC, and it features 25 problems similar to the Rhind Papyrus. And then going back to how they would write their mathematics, the scribes would use a hieratic system, but they started off with a hieroglyphic numeral system, and this was a decimal system that went by ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. So if you were writing 1, you would write it as the little dash, 10, the N or the upside down U, 100 the swirl, and then 1000 the candle, and so on for the numbers. So say So they didn't just have like 1, 2, 3, 4 as you and I know today. It would be like if they wanted to write 4, they would write 4 of the ones. Or in our example here, we have 258,458, which they would start with the 8, or you could start the other way, it doesn't matter. And so the 8, we would write the 8 tallies. And then 50, we need 5 of the upside down U's. And then we go to 400. So we need 4 of the swirls, and then so on. So I thought it would be good to start with a practice of this. So we have here the candles, the swirls, upside down U's, and the tally marks. So think about how you would write that one, and then how you would write the second one. So we know that the tallies represent ones, the U's represent tens, the swirls represent hundreds, and then the candles start with 1,000. So think about how you would write that, and then now that you've thought about it, and then we can go back and look at what the symbols represent for 1 second. So that's what they represent. So now we have the number here that the Egyptians would write, and this would be represented as, so we have 3 of those, so 3,244. Because we have 4 upside down U's and 4 tallies. The next one that we have are the fingers, which represent the tens thousands place, so the next place up. So we have 2 fingers, so that would be 20,000, 21,000, and then that would be 21,230, and then 4, 5, 6, 7 tallies. So 21,237. So then that's how they would write that big of a number. So now going on, this is moving a second. Okay.
Please don't need to pause because you're doing pretty well.
Okay, and now going on to the African diaspora. So the African diaspora are the people that carry on the legacy of the ancient Egyptians and are helping to lead the way in the mathematical contributions. This was not always the case, as we saw earlier, how people were trying to hide Black Africans' heritage of having ancient Egyptian heritage, and how they were treated after the slavery and slave trades. And the ancient Egyptians' achievements were lost in relation to them. And so they had to work really hard and strive to show that they did have intellectual abilities. An example of how they were treated or thought upon was in the 20th century, in 1916. In the 20th century, they had racist attitudes and beliefs towards them. And then in 1916, a Stanford professor and former American Psychological Association president, Louis Terman, stated that Mexican and American Negro families cannot master abstractions, but they can often be made efficient workers. So they really had to work hard and strive to show that they did have intellectual abilities just like as any other person could have. And there's a man named Scott Williams that created a site for the African diaspora people. It's called the Mathematicians of African Diaspora. And he gave it the acronym MAD for short. And he used MAD to represent the large number of Blacks in the mathematics community that had to persist in the discipline despite experiences with overt racism and other forms of wide-ranging attempts to exclude them from participating. And the site showcased many people, as many as he could get of the African diaspora that have made significant achievements. And the site also goes on to the history, too, of the Egyptians and the people, and it talks about the Labomo and Ishango bones. And these bones were all the way back, predated all the way back to 35,000 BC, and it's the first known mathematical, possible mathematical writing, as the bones had indentations on them that represented that they were doing some type of math all the way back then. And then the site also discusses very important African diaspora historical figures, one of the figures being known as Benjamin Banneker. And he worked with Thomas Jefferson to actually create what we know as today as Washington, D.C. Another African diaspora person is Arthur Walker Jr. And he created telescopes. So telescopes that he developed captured the first pictures of the corona in space, and that also encouraged many other people of African diaspora descent to follow in his footsteps and believe that they can have intellectual achievements. And him doing that resulted in Stanford having more minority graduate physics and applied physics students than any major research university in the country. And then shortly discussing some of the current African diaspora mathematicians today. So there's Dr. Chastity Bozeman, that's showcased on the site, and she's a professor at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, and while going for her PhD, she was a part of the Mathematicians of Color Alliance that would help bring in and encourage more people of color to pursue mathematics as a career. And there's also Dr. Ron Buckmeyer that's showcased on the site, and he's the longest running chess master since age 15 and created the biggest LGBTQ informational site we know today as the Queer Resource Directory. And there's a picture of them. That's Dr. Bozeman on the top left, and then Dr. Buckmeyer on the bottom right. And then here are my citations for the pictures I used. Thank you so much.